Ready. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Zobrio University's webinar on MIP vendor management. Today we have Kathy Dwyer, a senior application consultant here at Zobrio, to lead the webinar. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat, which is located at the bottom of your screen, and we will go over all questions at the end. Thank you, and I will now hand over the hosting back to Kathy.
Thank you very much. This is Kathy, and today we will be reviewing some of the tips and tricks we can do in the vendor file in your MIP fund accounting software. Okay. So some of these subjects that we'll cover are not heavy lifting, but you might pick up a tip or trick here. I am going to start by going under maintain and into the vendor file itself. And what you'll see here is I'm in the NTO or demo database, so there's not a lot of vendors here, but it will help illustrate a few points that we're going to cover. Okay. So first off, when you get in here to your vendor file, you'll notice there's a quick search box in the upper part of the screen. When you put a value into that field, what happens is the program literally searches on the vendor ID and the vendor name columns. And you'll know that because you see an asterisk next to those columns. And basically when you put in a value and you hit the search button, as you can see, the grid responds back with basically a definition or a finite number of records based on what we're searching for. Okay. I can hit the icon that has the eraser, which basically clears the filter and puts the full grid back in place. Okay. Also in the upper right where it says records per page, depending on the size of your vendor file, you may increase or decrease the number of records that display simultaneously, and then it's just a matter of the green arrows or sometimes VCR, called VCR buttons up at the top, will page you through the records. Okay. Now, there's also here is you can switch over from a quick search to what we call our filter, and that's the filter icon with the green arrow and the red arrow pointing up and down. And what that does is it just changes the appearance of the screen, and then at that point, all the different variables or data fields that you see on the left, you can actually search a vendor by any one of those fields. For instance, we might say, you know what, how many vendors do we have here in Houston? So I'm going to filter on city equals to Houston, hit our display icon, and as you can see, certainly the grid responds back and says, okay, here they are. Okay. Again, we can clear by coming up and hitting the icon with the pencil. Okay. So sort of as a quick review here is again, we have, this is the filtering, which can look at any one of the columns based on the data you select. Or if I switch us back over to the quick search is working off the vendor ID as well as the vendor name. Also keep in mind with the vendor file, you can take any one of the columns, and I'll go down to city and double click it. And what happens is that will put the grid in sorted order by the column, in this case, city, that I selected. A single click will basically, you can get an ascending sort or a descending sort. Clicking back to an ID or a different column will resequence the grid by the selected column. Okay. So again, not a tremendous amount of heavy lifting there. But just a few ideas of how you can manage your vendor file. Okay. Now, also beyond the basics is if I go ahead and hit the new button, okay, what you'll notice in the upper left there's a series of icons where we can associate a distribution code to a vendor. We can look up vendor activity or balances based on the money bag icon. This merge and rename icon, which we'll talk about here shortly, and then you can put an attachment to a vendor. Okay. Now, the merge and rename function is pretty handy in the sense that two options are available within this one dialog that popped up. And kind of right in the center, you'll see there's the merge and the rename radio buttons. Okay, but let me give you an example of basically a rename. I'm going to take vendor ABC, and I'm going to say, you know what, I don't really like that vendor ID, so I'm going to change it, and I'll do very basic, ABC1, and it will require a comment, and I have the workstation preference turned on that required fields come up in a color. My favorite is orange, so I picked orange. But what's happening here for the most part is I'm basically saying change vendor ABC to vendor ID ABC1. Okay. When I do that, it just basically says, hey, this is what's going to happen. More or less, are you sure? Okay. And if I say OK, and then hit the drop down, you'll see now it becomes ABC1. Okay. So what it's doing in essence is the rename is changing the vendor ID, and then if for any reason you need to change additional information, name, address, payments, and terms, you can do it directly off of that particular field. Okay. Now, let me come back and hit new again, because you do need to hit the new button so that the merge rename icon has focus. Okay. This time what we're going to do is we're going to merge two vendors into one. And basically what I'm going to do is show you this. In the drop list for the vendors, I've got vendor XYZ and XYZ incorporated. And kind of looking at it, it's like, oh, those look like the same two vendors. Let's merge them together. Okay, so we hit our new button, so we have focus. We hit our icon, okay, and basically what you do is you specify the vendor. Then we basically say we're going to merge, and the vendor ID that we're merging into, okay, and I'll just keep it simple, a comment called test, and say okay. And what's nice about this is the system's always going to come back and show you in the text what it's doing. So all XYZ records into XYZ Inc. So that XYZ Inc. will be the surviving record. Okay. So it's going to rename or merge, two vendors merged to one, including the vendor history. Okay. I'm going to say yes to that. Hit the drop down. And again, now where previously we had XYZ and then XYZ Inc., they've been consolidated into a single vendor. Okay. So kind of a handy tip to know is that merge. And again, the trick is hit the new button so that you have focus. Now, moving along to the subject of deleting vendors is pretty much in MIP, if a vendor has not had an activity, you can basically select that vendor from the list, okay? And I'm going to roll down and just grab this one called payroll. And if there's no activity, I can hit regardless of there's activity or not, if I hit the delete button, the system will ask me to confirm that I'm deleting. And this is a standard message that basically says, hey, wait a minute, there's history, so I can't allow you to delete the vendor. Okay. So in MIP, deleting vendors with activity, there's not really a great solution. There's not a purge. It's basically transactions that are accumulating into your history file, their SQL file, so they just they continue to grow, but the system will bring that information back quickly. There is honestly some school of thought where I've seen vendors or customers might create a vendor, a single vendor called delete or obsolete, and then what they end up doing is they'll merge, like in this case payroll, if I wanted to get rid of this, they'll merge payroll into this vendor called obsolete. And what that's doing is it's cutting down on the number of vendor IDs. You're not really losing the history because it's now under the word obsolete. So it's an ability to kind of consolidate. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that, to be honest with you. It's labor intensive, and then also, yes, the history is would be under the new vendor obsolete, but you lose the original. You know, it's there, but you got to really drill in to find what you're looking for. So delete, not a great solution out there in MIP. Okay. I will tell you this, from a positive standpoint, we can come up here under reports. This is a feature that was added to MIP not too long ago, where if I go up under reports and come on down to accounts payable and go to vendor activity, okay, there is this report here within the pointed brackets, which means it's a template which you can run, or you can copy it out and make modifications, which I've done here. This is a copy, the 0 vendors. This is an ability to basically specify a date range, and then what happens is what's new about this report is on the filter to the right here, upper right, where it says 0 activity equals yes. That's kind of a new field that was added to MIP maybe a release or 2 ago. And the benefit of that is you can basically run a report to see how many vendors and who they are, and you can pull as much content as you want by going to the Content tab. But what it basically does is it will come back and show you vendors that don't have any activity, and then from that standpoint, you can go back through and if you're really looking to delete or clean up your file, you can take that list and go one at a time. So again, not a great solution, but there's a few things you can do there to clean up old vendors. Okay. Now also, what we wanted to mention here too is in MIP, I'm going to go in under Organization and select Set Up User-Defined Fields. Okay. MIP has the ability for us to add a field, whether it's numeric or text or yes, no, and you can basically add that information to a number of different locations in the system. And by that I mean you might associate it, like as you'll see here in the list, you might want to track something under your AR system that's not a standard field in MIP. You might want to put something on your employee file if you're a payroll user. Transaction lines, transaction documents, that might be a custom field that you add, that you key it in maybe when you're entering some type of revenue or a particular journal entry. But here, we're going to look at with the vendors. Now again, what this is a user-defined field is the ability to add a field to your vendor master file and track information that might not be part of the standard MIP vendor data layout. Okay, so for instance here, I created a field called alt email or alternate email, and as you can see here kind of in the center, I didn't hit the checkbox for required. In essence, what I did is I said it was a string, or it can be up to a text box with a maximum of 255 characters. Now, what happens with something like that is this, let me go ahead and hit close, and I'll show you how that relates back to your vendor file. Okay, is back to maintain and to vendors. Okay, and I'll just double click on, I suppose anyone. Let me go here with the city constructors. Okay, when you set up a user-defined field, follow your tabs across, vendor, address, payment, and terms, and you'll notice your user-defined field out to the right. Okay, that tab gets added to your screen if you've added a user-defined field. And what ends up happening here is if I click on that, you'll see alternate email, and you can basically type in a value, and that's how you can custom add a field to your vendor file without having to go back to, say, a programmer and say, can you do X, Y, or Z? And keep in mind, those fields, you know, the biggest thing I will say about adding a user-defined field here to MIP is it has to be done when nobody else is working in the system. Okay? even you yourself, as if you're the person adding this field, you're going to make sure that you don't have any other jobs open. Okay, and you can tell that by your tabs at the bottom of the screen. And again, you can do anything here. Let me just give you an idea. I'm going to come in here and just indicate whether, and I'll be succinct here, whether somebody is part of the bid list, the state bid list. Okay, and just wanted to show you this is these are the different types of fields that you can have. Okay, again, whether it's excuse me, numeric or date or yes, no. Let me go ahead and make that a yes, no. I'm going to even check off that this is, no, I'll leave it as is, okay, and go ahead and save that. Okay. Now, once I do that, and the system comes back and saves the file, it does do a lot of flashing because it's adding a record to the database. But as we come back here to the vendors, okay, again, let's go ahead and pick on city. Okay, down to our user-defined tab. Now you can see the second field is added there as bid, and it really means, am I on the fixed bid? Checkoff means yes, unchecked means no. And that quickly you can add a field to your vendor file. Okay. Now, what does this do for you? Well, when you add these fields, promise it's not COVID, what ends up happening is you can report on these fields. Like you could go into your vendor file and a vendor report, and a user-defined field could be used as a column as part of your contents, or it could be used as a filter to pull certain vendors or restrict a list of vendors that you're getting. Just a note too here, as far as just wanted to share this with you, is something that will be coming soon, very soon, to MIP is on your 1099 information tab. What then is going to happen is currently you'll see that this vendor is coded as a miscellaneous box 7, which is non-employee compensation. Well, new for calendar 2020 is this miscellaneous 07 is being replaced by a new 1099 called 1099 NEC, non-employee compensation. And what happens is anybody that's currently coded as miscellaneous 07 really needs to be recoded as this new form NEC, which will become available in this drop list here for form type. And then over here on the right, it will end up being box 1. So, so MIP is coming down with that, I assume, in the next probably 2 to 3 weeks. When that's out there, we will basically go ahead and get the update installed on your systems and just send you a quick note of what reminder to basically change the type of 1099, and then we'll go from there. We'll see how things work out. So I want to thank you all for attending, and if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is Kathy with a K, .Dwyer, D-W-Y-E-R, @Zobrio.com. Again, thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. A recording of this webinar will be made available shortly. Thank you.